on the concept next week.
Richard Downs reporting, and I'm joined now in studio by Dr. Stephen Stewart, a liver consultant at the Mater Hospital, and from our Cork studio by Sam Bowman, Executive Director of the Adam Smith Institute, a UK think tank which promotes libertarian and free market ideas. Dr. Stewart, if I could come to you first, why does minimum unit pricing make a difference?
Well, minimum unit pricing, as you know, is sets a price below which alcohol cannot be sold, and it's dependent on the volume of alcohol and on the concentration of alcohol. So it does not affect really pubs or restaurant prices of alcohol, and only the very cheapest. And by affecting the very cheapest, we put up the price of, say, the very strong ciders that I see patients drinking 6-7 litres of, coming in with very, very severe liver disease, and presenting every day in the Mater. We will be presenting another couple of patients who are in their 30s or 40s drinking high volume of very strong alcohol, and this is the one that's really going to be targeted, and those patients are going to ultimately drink less and end up with less alcohol related harms. And
that could actually make a big difference very quickly.
Well, there's a lot of evidence for this. There's a lot of evidence that links alcohol price with consumption. Alcohol is a very, very price sensitive commodity, and there's very good modelling from Sheffield about the impact this will have, but we actually have real world evidence from British Columbia and Canada, and we saw from that if you increase the price of alcohol by 10%, you see a reduction in consumption by 4.5%, but most importantly, you see a reduction in mortality from alcohol-related causes by 32% within the first year.
OK, well, let's go to Sam Bowman in our Cork studio. Sam Bowman, that sounds like it's a pretty unarguable case.
Well, a couple who drinks within the completely healthy recommended allowance cheap alcohol from Lidl or Aldi, beer, about £1 or one can every day, will be €773 worse off under these proposals. So that's totally normal, responsible drinkers. They'll be €773 worse off. Doctors, politicians who are proposing this won't be worse off by a penny. Minimum alcohol pricing, because it only affects the bottom of the market, only affects people on tight budgets and on low incomes, and it kicks the poor. Now, it's true that it does reduce consumption, but the question is, whose consumption does it reduce? Alcoholics don't drink any less, they just spend more money on it. The people who drink less are people on tight budgets who like to enjoy a glass of wine with meal, like to have 1 can, 2 cans of beer every evening. That's it. Those are the people who drink less. It's not the problem drinkers. So it's not good for public health reasons. It really doesn't achieve the aims that we actually have. But what it does do is really hammer people on low incomes and tight budgets to the tune of €773 a year. That's a lot of money.
OK, we'll deal with some of those points with Dr. Stewart in a moment, but it does surely discourage young people from binge drinking at a time when they're very prone to being damaged in the long term by it.
Well, actually, the statistics show that young people are drinking much, much less now than they were even 5 years ago. And over the last 10 years, alcohol consumption in Ireland has fallen by about 25%. So we're already on a very, very positive trend without this minimum alcohol pricing. But as I've said, it's not people who go binge drinking who are going to drink less, unless you adjust the meaning of binge drinking to include almost everybody. The people who drink less on this are responsible, moderate drinkers who would like to have a glass of wine, but they aren't that pushed. It does make them a little bit happier, it makes their lives a little bit better. The people who just spend more money are the alcoholics and the addicts. Yes, fine, if you want more money going to supermarkets, fair enough. Minimum alcohol pricing is a great idea. If you want to stop alcoholism, if you want to stop drug or alcohol addiction, it will do nothing. And the Sheffield policy, the Sheffield model that Stephen's just cited, I think is garbage, because it assumes, in fact, that alcoholics are going to be the most price sensitive. And common sense, not just the empirical evidence, which does say this, but common sense alone should tell us alcoholics are the least price sensitive. They will switch between brands, but they're still going to get their drink at the end of the day. And we know that from the empirical evidence.
OK, well, I'll put that point to Dr. Stewart. There's a couple of things there, but to deal with the last point first, if you're addicted to alcohol, you're going to drink no matter what the price is.
And that's not true, because you're going to be limited by how much money you have. I mean, there are so many points there that are just plain wrong that I think we should tackle them, each of them in order. So, first of all, the low risk drinker, a poor drinker on a low income, will be affected about 30 to 50 cent a week. The heavy drinker who has a low income will be very significantly affected by this legislation, but that is particularly the target of the legislation. So one example is, if I give you some example around prices, so say a 10% bottle of wine will have a minimum price of $5.60, but if it's a 15% bottle of wine, it'll have a minimum price of $8.20.
Very few bottles of wine are 10% proof.
There are now, and it's drifted up. But what we will see is a reduction in the concentration of alcohol in a bottle of wine, and that can only be a good thing. Whereas the 6 litres of strong cider, currently you can buy for €10, and I might see a patient who's drinking that every day. That will go to €35 a day, and that we know that will have an impact on consumption.
But surely, if somebody is an alcoholic, if they're addicted to alcohol, they will spend whatever money they have on alcohol, and if it means less food, if it means less money going to their dependents, that's what they'll do.
So there's two really important points about that. First of all, they are affected by price, and secondly, a lot of the people, most of the people I see who are presenting with very end-stage liver disease are not dependent on alcohol. They are not alcoholics. They are people who drink heavily but are not dependent. They are very, very price sensitive. And I'll give one example. There was a patient who came into the matter a couple of years ago, and he was found by his daughter. He had liver disease and he'd vomited a couple of litres of blood and was unconscious, brought into hospital. We brought him to the endoscopy unit. We bandaged the varices, the veins that were bleeding, and he went to the intensive care, and over a week or so recovered and came out of hospital. And about 6 weeks later, he'd given up alcohol. I saw him in the clinic, and I said, "I'm really pleased with you. You stopped drinking." And he said, "Yeah, but I mean, if alcohol is so bad for you, I didn't realise it was so bad for you. If it's so bad for you, how come it's so heavily promoted? How come it's so cheap? And how come it's available everywhere?"
OK. Let's look at another issue which is raised, which is the issue of equity. Now, this will hit, as you said, people on low incomes who drink immoderately. Yeah. And that's what you said, is that's what the aim is. What about people who are well off, who are drinking immoderately? What about a barrister going home after a day's work, tucking into a fine bottle of brandy, is not going to be affected, whereas somebody who's been working on a building site or something goes home, wants to have a few cans, he's getting hit?
So I don't think we should not introduce legislation because it's not going to work for everybody. You know, we're going to have to think carefully about how we tackle that other population. And there's going to be no individual law that is going to be able to affect every single harmful drinker. But what we have to do is
increase the excise duty on all alcohol, which would make it more expensive for everyone.
It's a lot easier for the drinks industry to get around those taxes. What they can't get around is a minimum unit price. There's a set price of which they can't get around. But we're going to have to tackle a much broader problem in all socioeconomic groups, and we do that through limiting advertising, limiting availability. And this is that's the beautiful thing about this public health bill, is that we are currently in the middle of a public health crisis. Any doctor will tell you that. That's what I see in the matter. And the way to tackle that is public health legislation.
Okay. I want to bring Sam Bowman in again. Sam, as I say, you work for the Adam Smith Institute. Adam Smith, I think, would have held that anybody who wants to be a drunk has a perfect right to be a drunk, as long as society as a whole isn't harmed. But surely if we have a public health crisis where we have 3 people per day dying because of alcohol-related causes, surely something has to be done.
Maybe it does, but I think as long as the costs are personal and private, and they are very huge costs for people who die or people who become unwell because of alcohol, they're very significant costs, but those costs are borne by them. They also bear the benefits, and most people who drink responsibly. Most people who drink bear benefits. It's fun. People enjoy doing it. I don't think that we should look at every single thing that happens in our lives and say, well, there are some costs to this, so we should ban it, or we should try to stop people from doing it. And to go back to what Stephen was saying, I think
the estimated cost of the health service of alcohol-related problems is €3.7 billion.
But of course that doesn't count the money that we raise in tax from alcohol as well. And when you factor that in, the cost is much lower. And in fact, in the UK at least, the cost is negated by the amount of money that we raise from alcohol taxes. But I really want to pick up on something Stephen said, which is just because something only affects one part of society, we shouldn't do it. I think that's a really good reason not to do something. The EU Advocate General has called minimum alcohol pricing discriminatory because it discriminates against the poor. If we have a policy that only hits the poor, and it hits them really hard, the numbers I'm talking about are there for everybody to see. If you drink low-priced beer, 1 can every night, you will be €773 worse off between a couple. Those are only poor people, people on low budgets who will be hit. That is a really good reason not to do that policy, because we should be living in a fair society, not just one where doctors and politicians who do not pay the consequences of their own actions get to dictate to everybody else how we live our lives.
OK, well, let me put that to Dr. Stewart. How can you justify a tax that only hits poor people?
This is consumption and price does affect everybody. And I would argue the case that even
minimum pricing,
if
you said yourself, only affects the poor.
No, I said you shouldn't not introduce a law because it affects particularly one group. We're not going to have... what you want is one law. If we have one law that's going to solve problems amongst all socio-economic groups, we don't have that. What we currently have is a public health policy that is driven by the alcohol industry. And somebody earlier on in the clip said we're going to have a nanny state. So currently we have a nanny industry in alcohol who are deciding the pricing, deciding the availability, and deciding exactly how they want to promote alcohol. They've been given some ideas about how they might limit advertising, and they never play by the rules. So they never do this properly.
OK, well, what about that point, Sam? The industry seems to have the whip hand here, so shouldn't government try and tackle that?
I think the point is that people enjoy drinking. We already have some of the highest alcohol taxes in Europe, in fact in the world, in Ireland, on alcohol. To pretend that the industry is setting all of the rules here is just not true. But I mean, really what Stephen is saying is he's annoyed that he's not in charge. He's annoyed that the alcohol industry has too much say and he wants doctors to be able to have a say instead. I think that's not right. I think that we should let individuals make the decision for themselves about how much they drink and what they drink.
I think it's really important.
Sorry, Sam, just let Stephen get one final word in.
I think it is really, really important that doctors do come out and talk about this, because they have not got an agenda in selling alcohol. They've not got an agenda of trying to make profit. All they're interested in, the only reason I'm here tonight is I'm compelled to be here because of my patients. I'm compelled because I'm sick of seeing more and more people at a younger and younger age dying of alcohol problems.
Okay.
And that's what we need to do about it. We need public legislation.
Dr. Stephen Stewart and Sam Bowman, thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Miriam.
Well, once upon a time, and not so long ago, Ireland was full of priests and nuns, but that's no longer the case. In particular, religious orders that ran many of our schools, hospitals,